I'm Carys Matthew.
And I'm Matthew McGregor.
And this is Over the Top, Under the Radar, a weekly look at the stories in the news that are being overreported and the ones going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This week's show is co-hosted by Matthew McGregor, who is the CEO of the campaign group 38 Degrees. Matthew's worked in politics and campaigning for 20 years here and abroad, and he spent 10 years in the US, including President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about your current job. You're chief exec of 38 Degrees. For those who haven't heard of 38 Degrees, tell us about the organisation.
38 Degrees is an online community of almost 1 million people from across the country and across backgrounds who take small actions, signing a petition, writing to their MP, chipping in a bit of money to fund some campaigning. Small things that add up on issues like fairness, economic justice, climate justice, the NHS. We've been going for 15 years or so. I joined the organisation 4 years ago, and we have an amazing group of supporters right across the country, more than 1,000 supporters in every single constituency, funded by our supporters, at least one donor in every constituency of the country, apart from Fermanagh and South Tyrone. I wish we could get one in Fermanagh and South Tyrone, so I didn't have to keep caveating that.
Shout out to them if you're listening. Come on.
Shout out. If you are in Fermanagh and South Tyrone, please get in touch. And online campaigning in small ways that add up. I think the thing that is really important about 38 Degrees is that we have supporters from across the political spectrum. People of all parties take part in our campaigns, including many Reform voting supporters, interestingly, but lots of Labour voting supporters, Green voting supporters, and Lib Dems and so on. So
I guess I think of 38 Degrees as like a digital version of a sort of community group, right? So it's just like people who come to volunteer at the food bank or the local library come from lots of different political backgrounds. So how has that been? You know, you're someone who's a political animal and you have your own politics. Like, how did you find out you had so many Reform supporters, and like, how do you deal with that as an organisation?
We found out because we talk to our supporters all of the time. Lots of surveys. We even do focus groups of our own supporters every few weeks. We just talk to people. I think the thing about 38 Degrees supporters is obviously 1 million people is you're going to get a level of diversity across interests and backgrounds and politics. And there are lots of things we agree on and lots of things that we disagree on. But I think to a great extent, we share values. So you can share the values of wanting there to be a fairer country, a country where people are treated with respect and treat each other with respect, and where we build a more sustainable future in terms of the world we live in. That doesn't mean you have to agree on every single dot and comma of tax policy or education policy or whatever else it might be. I think in some organisations that would be a weakness. Lots of disagreements, lots of differences of opinion. For 38 Degrees, it means that there's no barrier to getting involved in a campaign that we're running on the NHS, if you agree with that campaign on the NHS, and the campaign that we might be running on fracking or oil and gas licenses. You don't agree with us, and so you sit with that one out. And it doesn't mean you have to sort of storm out the door because 38 Degrees is running a campaign that you're not 100% aligned with. Whenever we ask people to sign a petition or take part in an action, we always include a I disagree button. So people can tell us why they disagree with that particular campaign, and we always read through all of those comments. And for us, it's become a strength to have people that don't agree with us on every single dot and comma of every campaign we run.
Are there any common threads in terms of what is pushing people away from the bigger parties when you like talk to supporters? Is there a reason that people are drawn to Reform in particular, but also the other kind of smaller parties?
There is one overwhelming driving factor in British politics, and I think it's the same in other countries as well, which is affordability, the cost of living a little, not just getting by, but also being able to do those nice things in life that bring joy to a family, take away on a Friday night, cinema with the kids, whatever it might be, football match for me. We did some polling recently. We were able to break it down to a constituency level. And we asked people, are you feeling better off, worse off, or about the same as you were 4 years ago? Politics is often treated as quite a complicated thing by people in the media, people in Westminster. Who's up, who's down? Has this resignation caused a change of public opinion? What happened in PMQs, etc.? I actually don't think politics is that complicated. We asked that question about people's own living standards, and in 92% of constituencies across the country, a majority of people said that they were no better off or worse off than they were a year ago. That's politics. And you look at elections in the US, Australia, France, Germany. Yes, there are issues of climate justice, people who are outraged and sickened by what's happening in Gaza. People are really passionate about a range of different topics, but fundamentally politics comes down to, are people feeling better off? And do people feel safe for themselves and their families? People don't in this country at the moment. They voted for change in 2016, didn't get it. They voted for change in 2019, didn't get it. They voted for change in 2024. At the moment, people don't feel like they're getting it. And Reform and the Green Party in particular are the next change options off the rank. And I think it is pretty much simple as that.
I have so many follow-up questions to that, but you have segued quite nicely into the reason I invited you on the podcast. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what brought you to the US and kind of what you did when you were there?
Yeah, I spent almost 10 years in the US working for political campaigns. My wife and I, we both got jobs on the Obama campaign in 2012. She ran the BarackObama.com site and I was kind of head of digital rapid response. So in a way, I worked for Barack Obama, but I spent the whole election campaign thinking about, talking about, writing about Mitt Romney. After that, we moved to New York and we spent 5 years living in New York, and I voted in the previous 2 mayoral elections, and so followed the mayoral contest this time, really incredibly closely.
Okay, so Matthew and I have taken a look at the news agenda. We've picked 2 stories each. One we think has gone over the top and one that has flown under the radar. Matthew, what is your under the radar for this week?
My under the radar for this week is anywhere in the US apart from New York. There are elections.
Oh, no. Okay, fine. Okay. We're going to get to it, guys. We will get to Mamdani. Okay, tell me everything. Why is it flying under the radar?
Obviously, the election in New York, incredibly exciting, very inspirational. I'd love for us to somehow pivot on to talking about that. But I want to talk about a woman called Ghazala Hashmi. Last night, she was elected to be the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, elected statewide for the Democratic Party. She's the first Muslim woman to be elected to a statewide office anywhere in the United States ever. That is an incredibly inspiring campaign too. She has been a state senator from the Richmond area, which is the sort of state capital of Virginia. And she was inspired to run for state senate a few years ago by Donald Trump's Muslim ban that he brought in his first term. And she's now the first Muslim elected to a statewide office, lieutenant governor in Virginia. That election, plus Mikey Sherrill has been elected governor of New Jersey. Voters in California passed a referendum, a Prop 50, that has allowed the state to redistrict the congressional seats. Those are big wins for the Democrats. But also down the ballot, there's a county in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, that was targeted by far-right activists who took over the school boards. School boards are kind of elected in most of the US. These far-right activists who are transphobes, racists, misogynists, got elected to school boards and were kind of using them to further their own political agenda. Well, last night, the last Republican has been voted off those school boards in Bucks County. So it's not just these big headline changes that are happening in New York, as exciting as that is. Under the radar, Democrats are winning across the board. That's really exciting because I think for the last 2 years and a bit, we've been worrying and wondering, when it comes to the crunch, are the polls that show Donald Trump unpopular, are the polls that show Republicans having high unfavorability rates, will that translate into activity in the ballot box? And yes, Mamdani is really inspirational, especially for the people on the left, but to beat back Trump, we need a broad front of Democrats with a range of different backgrounds who can win across a really diverse country. And last night, in addition to the result in New York, Democrats beat Republicans like a drum. I also think that the Democratic Party, and I think progressives generally, need to find coalitions that can unite against far-right populism. If we are purists about the bit of the progressive spectrum that we're on and turn our backs on each other, I think that we're going to struggle. And I think what we saw last night is an emergence of a broader coalition. Lots of Democrats didn't endorse Mamdani, and I think there needs to be a reckoning about that. But lots did. Governor-elect Spanberger in Virginia is not Zohran Mamdani's politics at all, but they agree on far more than they disagree on. And that is the kind of coalition that Democrats will need to build if they're going to beat Trumpism in 2028. Obviously, Donald Trump can't stand for re-election, no matter what he says. No matter what he says, if he stands for election, it will be incredibly illegal, and basically America will be over as a democracy to the extent that it is. But Trumpism will still be on the ballot paper in 2028, and we need a broad coalition, a popular front, if you will, to beat that back. And Democrats who won last night represent that broad spectrum of politics.
As you say, the Democratic candidates on the ballot this week are sort of different political flavours, but there is a bit of a common thread around cost of living and affordability in the economy. So it's also, as you say, like we need a coalition, a broad united front. And also there are things that unite us, whether or not we're like avowed socialists or we're kind of moderates or centrists.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we should be comfortable with politicians describing themselves in ways that make sense for them. Zohran calls himself a democratic socialist. Governor-elect Sherrill doesn't. But they both agree that the role of government is to bear down on affordability issues and to ensure that those with the broader shoulders pay their fair share of taxes and so on and so on and so on. The list of things that those people who were successful last night agree on is much, much, much longer than the things that they disagree on. I think it's really important, going back to what I said about how people feel in the UK, 92% of constituencies, people say that they feel no better off or worse off than they did a year ago. In 2020, when people were really having a hard time in the US, Joe Biden knocked Donald Trump out of the park. That election wasn't close. In 2024, there were extenuating circumstances, President Biden's health and so on, but Donald Trump had baggage of his own as well, and he was able to win that election fairly comfortably. The trend in all of these things is not necessarily about the politics of the individual, but about the context of people's lives not being good. When I worked for President Obama in 2012, we watched some focus groups early on in the campaign from Iowa of people who had voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and then voted for a Tea Party candidate in 2010. This is a sort of far-right grouping. So they voted for Obama one cycle and then a far-right candidate the next cycle. We couldn't figure that out and wanted to really understand it. And I remember this one guy in a focus group, it's really stayed with me. He said, all I've wanted from life is to be able to have a job that's good enough so I can own my own home and send my two girls to college. And because of the financial crash, I've lost my job, my house has been repossessed, and the college fund is gone. And I will keep on voting to fire people until my life gets better. And, I think that is as true today as it was then. And politicians who are able to both connect and show that they understand that, and also bring forward the policies that will convince people that they can do something about it, I think those politicians are going to do well. And politicians who feel disconnected, who say, it's too hard, we can't do anything about this, we don't want to take on the rich, we don't want to take on the powerful interests, saying that implicitly or explicitly, those politicians will do badly.
Most voters, whether we like it or not, aren't ideologically dyed in the wool. I mean, most of us aren't, even those of us who, have a party that we're affiliated to. People are complex, and the things that form their opinions are, based on more than a tick list of policies. I also think it's a great segue because this really exciting politician just won an election in New York, Zohran Mamdani, who I'm sure lots of people listening will be really excited about Mamdani. Here are the things that I think are great. Number one, he's left-wing, he's a socialist. And I think within that, he's just got really concrete, clear policies that tell a story about what he stands for. Buses, childcare, rent freezes. Really, really exciting. Charismatic. He's also done that thing that if you're like a political operative or like you work on a campaign, you're sort of told not to bank on, which is he turned a ton of people out that don't normally vote, which is really exciting. I think they're saying voter turnout in New York is like the highest in like half a century. And he just delivered a not too long, very enjoyable victory speech. It's like 23 minutes, some mic drop moments for his opponents. My favorite 4 words are to Trump, turn the volume up. And he also name checks aunties, which like doesn't happen enough. So, okay, so we'll segue to Mamdani. What do you think? What are you thinking about the victory?
Obviously, incredibly excited, incredibly pleased. The victory speech is brilliant. You got to watch it if you haven't. I never thought I would live to the point where a winner in a major office in the United States would quote Eugene Debs, founder and leader of the American Socialist Party.
It was such a good deep cut. It was so good.
Just incredible. Just incredible. One of the most formative moments in my life was England losing to West Germany in the 1990 World Cup semi-final, and he wasn't alive then. And that has left me sitting quietly in my own thoughts a couple of times.
Wait, when was he born? Oh God, you're right. He's born in the mid-90s?
He was born in 1991.
Oh my gosh.
1991. So,
oh, wow,
I mean, that is obviously tough to stomach. The second thing is, definitely let's talk about his politics, but he is extremely cool. Like, I wish I was like him. And I watch his videos because they are fun to watch.
He's so funny.
He's funny.
Have you seen where someone heckles him and says he's a communist when he's on a city bike, and he's like, I'm a cyclist?
It's pronounced cyclist. It's so good. But he just seems happy. He seems happy to see people. He seems happy to talk to them. He seems happy to be running. In 2009, I went to a Labour Party event where they were talking about the Obama campaign. And this person said, well, I went to this field office in Pennsylvania and people were very friendly and there were cupcakes and it was just so nice. And I just think, why don't we try that here in this country? I was like, what? Being nice. But I think there's something about Mamdani that's like, you can have hope, you can have joy, you can have excitement for the future without saying or giving the impression that you think everything's brilliant. He's fiercely ambitious for New York and determined to take on people who are going to be very, very powerful opponents to him. I didn't feel like I was having to eat my greens when watching content from Mamdani.
Exactly. And I think, we're going to have, ours will be, in a very fine tradition of endless commentary about what helped Mamdani to win. But I do think that sort of sense of humor and really fleet of foot campaigning, he, as you say, has clear politics. He is standing against wealthy interests and the establishment. I mean, he ran against a former Democratic candidate who stood as an independent backed by wealthy people because they didn't like the idea of Mamdani winning. But yeah, the things that I'll really remember is that he also experienced a huge amount of Islamophobia, all the kind of scaremongering that you'd expect. He did a video in Arabic after everyone was like, oh my God, he's a sinister Muslim. Some of what makes him great is that he's a great candidate. And then some of what makes him great and exciting is that it's you can stand for something. And even in a country where Donald Trump has just won re-election, you can call yourself a socialist and have socialist policies and get into office. But yeah, I think that, as you say, the joy of him as a candidate and just not taking stuff too seriously.
Unapologetic, but not overbearing about his politics. I felt like, fierce and ambitious, but treading fairly lightly. Usually engaging in politics is almost like doing your homework. A lot of his campaign was more like entertainment.
There's the bit of him that you can't replicate and the bit you can. And the bit you can't replicate is you've got a candidate who can do subway takes, which is a viral Instagram video series where a comedian holds a New York subway card and people just give a hot take and they're ridiculous. And you've got a candidate who can do subway takes and it's not cringe. He can make funny videos and it's authentic to him because of his age, because of his style. And then there's the bit that's as exciting to me, which is you can have socialist policies. You can boil them down to simple things that mean something for people, like free buses. And, we've both worked on the political campaign with a politician who's very interested in buses. And I just feel that sort of boiling down abstract socialism and redistribution of wealth, just you're going to have nice, free, fast buses. You're not going to have to pay. I just love the genius of the policies as well as him as a candidate.
Just talk like a human being as well. I think so often politicians in this country and other countries as well, this happens in America a lot, talk to each other instead of talking to the country. What does national renewal mean to anyone? I was at the Labour Party conference a few weeks ago and they had these banners everywhere, national renewal. And I genuinely think if you have to take multiple minutes to try and explain what you mean by that, then you've already failed. He talked about making New York more affordable by bringing in free childcare, making buses cheaper, and freezing everyone's rents. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that, I'm sure lots of people who listen to this agree with all of those things. But regardless, just talking like a human being. At 38 Degrees, we often talk about the pub test. Like, look at that email, look at that social media piece of content. Would you say that to one of your friends in the pub without feeling silly? Because if the answer is no, then maybe we shouldn't put it on the internet. You know what I mean?
Really wish that was a question that more politicians asked themselves before printing banners about national renewal. Part of the reason that Mamdani was able to present himself as like new and different and a change candidate is he very much was not from the Democratic establishment. And I believe up until polling day was not endorsed by a number of the Democratic establishment, Chuck Schumer. So what does that, like, in a way, maybe it helped because he really wasn't the candidate of the status quo. But like, is this a Democratic Party's marching orders, or are there people who are kind of sounding notes of caution? Are they right to say like, this is not a formula that can work outside of New York?
It's definitely Democrats who are sounding a note of caution. Lots of those people are just centrists who don't want that politics to work. But there are Democrats who I think are rightly cautious, and I'm sure Zohran Mamdani would be the same. And AOC has said has made interesting points on this as well. You have to run candidates who are authentic to the place where they're trying to get elected. What works in New York City may not work in Minnesota or Texas, and that's okay. Like, if you try and impose the politics and practice of Texas on New York City, you'll get bad results, but the same is true vice versa. I often get asked about American campaigning because I worked there for so long. What can we apply over here? And US politics and UK politics are as different as New York politics and Texas politics. You can't cut and paste, but you can learn and be inspired by some of the trends and the strategies. And the way in which Zohran had a really clear narrative about the problems that people are facing and why, and clear policies that would help people in their day-to-day, and was a candidate authentic to those policies and those solutions. That's not unique to left-wing politics. It's not unique to New York. That can be learned on and replicated elsewhere. So I hope that Democrats won't have a kind of a binary view of we should all copy what's happening in New York, or everything in New York is not relevant to us, we should ignore it. But I think that also the underlying point is that people are deeply, deeply unhappy about their economic circumstances and will keep on voting to fire people until they get better. And there's a lesson in that for progressives, which is in the UK, there is an incumbent Labour government. They will get fired if they don't make people's lives better. Simple as that.
I want to say a huge thank you to Lola, who became a Patreon supporter this week, and to Bronwen, who upgraded their membership this week. We are a tiny team making this podcast on an absolute shoestring. We only exist because a few hundred people support us on Patreon and help to cover our production costs. We need 100 more supporters for the show to be sustainable, and that is why I'm asking you to join us on Patreon today. Over the Top Under the Radar has an unashamedly left-wing look at the news agenda, and because of Patreon supporters, we don't have to chase advertising or clicks. If you've been listening for a while and thinking, I'm glad this podcast exists, we need you. Seriously. Packages start at £3 a month, less than coffee or a pint, and it helps to keep the podcast going. Please visit patreon.com/overthetopundерtheradar. If you become a Patreon supporter, as well as joining the team of people that help keep the podcast going, you will get an extra episode each week and access to our WhatsApp community where we get to geek out in between episodes and come up with questions for guests. My Under the Radar is the horrible knife attack that took place on a train. I don't think this has gone under the radar, to be clear, but I do think the decision to disclose the ethnicity of suspects has flown a little bit under the radar, and we haven't been talking about it enough. Assuming you don't know about this story, there was a horrible incident that took place on a train that was travelling from Doncaster to London. Multiple people were stabbed. And on Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m., the British Transport Police, who were responsible for this because it took place on a train, announced that 2 men had been arrested. a 32-year-old Black British national, I'm quoting them, and a 35-year-old British national of Caribbean descent. I've got questions about just even that sentence, but what I wanted to talk about in particular is why this decision was made and why I think it was a bad idea. So the decision to disclose the ethnicity of suspects dates back to a National Police Chiefs Council report from August. Yes, it sounds boring. And yes, I read it so that you don't have to. So following on from Southport, the NPCC, so like senior police officers, released new interim guidance that says to combat misinformation on social media, specifically, they cite the horrible attack in Southport, that the best thing to do was to update recommendations about when you disclose not only ethnicity, but immigration status. So the thing to say, first of all, is like there are already rules and regulations around what information the police release about suspects and people who've been charged with crimes and what the media can say about people who have yet to be tried. Those exist for a reason and those are a good thing. I really had a problem with releasing the ethnicity of the suspected train attackers. And I think it boils down to a couple of things. I mean, first of all, this information got released on Sunday morning. Within hours, it turned out that one of the two men was released without charge. He'd had nothing to do with the attack. So that was just random police misinformation. And then I think the second thing is it feels like a much bigger strategic failure to understand the far right playbook around crime and immigration and Black and brown people. And I just genuinely don't think the way to tackle misinformation is to start disclosing the race and especially the immigration status of people that we think have committed crimes. I mean, have you seen the story? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really similar reaction, and a lot of this has flowed from the mis and disinformation that the far right put out after the Southport incident. Number one, it creates a whole range of problems in itself for managing information because you get it wrong. There are changing circumstances, things to react to. But number two, it misunderstands the far right and it plays their game. It's a concession to the far right, but that's not how they work. They're not therefore saying, okay, fair enough, we've got what we want. They will keep moving the goalposts because this isn't what they're about.
Exactly. And it's specifically, this is about when the Southport attack happened, rumors circulated online that the attacker was a Muslim man. I think maybe some even of the misinformation named the person. And it's the people who shared that information didn't know who the attacker was. They were capitalizing on a crisis. So it's not like if you just tell far right actors, oh, a Muslim didn't do it, they're going to be like, oh, cool, bro, love Muslims now. Yeah. It's the misinformation playbook is part of a broader strategy to make every single violent or criminal incident where a white person's not involved proof that Black and brown people shouldn't be in the UK ultimately.
Yeah, it's an attempt to engage with a group of people on the basis of good faith who are fundamentally absolutely not and never will operate in good faith. They are bad faith actors, and you can't negotiate with that. Even when that information was released, you could see the way that far right influencers online reacted to it, sparking this huge racist debate about whether two Black guys could be British. And not just from the far fringes of the far right, but from the kind of far right influencers who get on Question Time, who are quoted in the newspapers. So this is just fundamentally a complete misunderstanding by the police of who they're dealing with. They're not dealing with people who are operating by the normal rules as we have understood them in the past. I think there's a couple of other elements of this that have a bit under the radar. The first one is that one of the heroes of this incident, a guy called Samir Zatouni, a member of staff on LNER, put himself literally in harm's way and is in hospital still. And number two, the actions of the driver to remain calm and collected and to get the train to a stop despite knowing what was going on behind them. We have seen time after time after time in this country transport staff being vilified for standing up for themselves and asking for fair compensation for the work that they do, often in difficult and often in dangerous circumstances. All of those people that have vilified transport staff for the last 20 years or so, all of a sudden very, very quiet about that.
Okay, so that was my under the radar. What is your over the top for the week? What has been talked about too much in the media?
My over the top is budget speculation. Not necessarily over the top in the sense that the budget is very important. It will have a really big impact on us, but over the top in what is being talked about. What is the media focus for the budget? And in particular, the media's total focus on tax rises and who will have tax increases. We saw the same playbook last year when the Times in particular, but other newspapers really went to town on VAT on private schools going up, something that impacts a tiny fraction of people who almost by definition, a vast majority of them can comfortably afford to pay that tax. A real focus on the kinds of taxes that, maybe a coincidence, maybe not, newspaper editors might be paying, like a higher rate of income tax is getting a huge level of attention. And what's not getting a huge amount of attention in all of this budget speculation is, why do we need those tax rises? Where has that come from? Why is the economy in a terrible state? What are the underlying causes of the troubles that our economy is having, the troubles that the NHS is having, the problems that our public services has? And what's also not getting that level of attention is the people who are affected by the sorry state that the country is in. The amount of coverage that there is for, an extra couple of pence on the higher rate of income tax versus the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of kids going to school hungry in the morning because their families literally can't afford to feed them, that we've got schools running food banks now. The imbalance in the coverage as we come into this really, really difficult budget is just grim.
It's a great over, especially because I feel like, and I know that maybe Rachel Reeves feels this because she talks a lot about the budget before the budget, and we can get to why she does that. But I do feel a bit like, like the cranky old people who are like, the Christmas decorations come out too early every year. I do feel like we've been talking about this end of November budget since the summer. Like, I'm just like, we don't, like, how long is the lead into the budget? Yeah, so I'm a bit over all budget speculation, but I think it's a really great call out of like what journalists focus in on. And I think it is, the stats are pretty clear that most newspapers and most of our national media is not super representative of like the country at large. But yeah, I think it's never been more clear when there's so much speculation about potential property taxes and higher levels of income tax, which like just will not affect most people in the country.
It's sort of a difficult topic because, if you've got some disposable income, if you're lucky enough in this cost of living crisis that we're in to have disposable income, would you rather spend that on going out for a nice dinner or increased taxes? I don't think it's a treachery to my progressive politics to say that most people, including me, would rather go out for a nice dinner. But there is a very, very big difference between, I don't want you to take away some of the disposable income I have versus I am being oppressed. It's like when it comes to other areas of politics, that phrase about when you've lived a life of privilege, equality feels like oppression. When you've lived a life of wealth, having your taxes go up a little bit, getting people stuck into a new class war it's just the other side of getting involved this time.
Yeah, and it really is like the amounts we're talking about, like we really are talking about tiny changes here. And I think you're right, it's about the people that are impacted and the disproportionate voice they have in British media. Because whereas at the same time, you mentioned schools and sort of the public sector, I've got a friend who's a secondary school teacher who said that they've now got a way for parents to give to the school via direct debit. And like, just like, we've got a QR code. And I was just like, okay, that's quite a dramatic change in the last few decades. And I don't really hear much about that, but I do hear a lot about people's like second homes, property taxes. Like, you're right, the private schools was the epitome of it. Like, such a small percentage of people go to private schools, but the amount of column inches and like web pages that were just expended on moderate cost increases for like a tiny group of people who should have been paying VAT anyway is like pretty wild. But like budget speculation, we're joking about it. Like, part of it is fear of the bond market and of the reaction. So there's this sort of culture of teasing everything, putting out test balloons before the actual budget, so that there aren't really any surprises or rabbits out of the hat. Because for Rachel Reeves as Chancellor, the fear is she announces something that freaks out the markets and suddenly all of our debt and things that we have to service gets more expensive. And that speculation, I guess, is why she's permanently trailing the budget like months in advance.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily completely share the politics of this government, but I've got some sympathy with that, right? Look what the bond markets did to Liz Truss, and they do have a huge amount of power. I mean, ultimately, they've got a lot of power because the government asked the markets to lend a huge amount of money. So if I lend somebody 20 quid, I've got some conditions attached to it. That's what the markets have done too. And it's not surprising that Rachel Reeves is incredibly sensitive to not having a repetition of what Liz Truss did to the country, because that wasn't just bad politics, that had a real lasting impact on lots and lots of people's lives. So I've got some sympathy for Reeves in that regard, and that's why she's going down the road of tax rises instead of going down the road of breaking her fiscal rules. But I think that ultimately, and this is where the media, the Reform Party, the Conservative Party, and others, if they don't want those rises to happen, have to say to all of us what they would do instead, because what they're effectively arguing for is the kind of austerity that would make George Osborne and David Cameron look like liberal lefties. The economy is in a really bad place, and if we don't find the money from somewhere, there's people much smarter than I am about whether the fiscal rules make sense, and there's obviously a debate going on about having the wealthiest pay the most instead of everyday working people. But if we don't find the money to sustain the public services and our pensions and everything else, we will have a level of austerity that we haven't seen in this country for decades.
My over the top is the Poppy Police. It's November. We are in the run-up to Remembrance Sunday, and the Royal British Legion, wonderful charity that's existed for, I think, over 100 years, sells poppies that you can wear to show respect to armed forces services. I do not have a problem with poppies, although I do have a tiny gripe, which is a lot of the poppies that you can buy at train stations have like a really fiddly pin, and they're made of paper, and often they fall off or you stab yourself. So putting that to the side, my issue is not poppies, it is the Poppy Police, which is like this chorus of, mostly on social media, but also in traditional media. The Daily Mail love to play this game, as do GB News. People who get really, really angry when they see someone not wearing a poppy. And more than that, people who decide that people not wearing poppies are making a political statement of like, I hate the armed forces, I hate this country. And so like what's happened now is wearing a poppy, especially on TV, if you watch, any sort of current affairs TV in the UK, you'll see for all of November, sometimes October, most presenters are wearing a poppy. And now it's become this weird, it's like become the definition of virtue signaling. Like you have to wear a poppy, otherwise you hate the country and you hate the soldiers. The level of ridiculousness, I think, has been summed up by two incidents. One happened just before we started recording. David Lammy, standing in for Keir Starmer in PMQs, wasn't wearing a poppy. Mid PMQs, another Labour MP handed him a poppy. Like they were throwing him a life jacket to get on his lapel, because it was oh no. And you just it's actually probably his just dropped off. Maybe he bought a paper one like me and he found it wasn't that robust. Maybe he got soup on his jacket and a staffer had to change it. But already, within hours, the Telegraph, Lammy forgets to wear poppy to first PMQs. The Daily Mail, David Lammy forgets remembrance symbol as he fills in. LBC say that a backlash has been sparked, and the Daily Express talk of the fury as David Lammy takes a poppy off a Labour MP who served in the RAF. So my over is the Poppy Police. We have lost our tiny minds. And the final anecdote I have to support that is another person who's come under a lot of flack for years is a loose woman presenter called Charlene White. She is also a black woman who doesn't wear a poppy around the time of Remembrance Day. She doesn't wear it because she thinks it violates impartiality rules that exist in broadcasting. That is her personal opinion, which she does not push down anyone else's throat. However, this year, the amount of abuse and hatred that Charlene received prompted her to post on Instagram a picture of her father, who served in the RAF, and a statement about the Royal British Legion, which she donates to and fundraises for. So that's right. Someone who actually does honest service people is from a family of servicemen, her dad and her uncle, served in the armed forces is being subject to a racist witch hunt because she's not wearing a metal or paper flower when she's on TV. So I'm over the poppy police. It's a madness. I can't handle it.
I think you're totally right. I wear a poppy when I remember to, because I don't move it from jumper to jumper each day, every day. I wear it as an act of remembrance, particularly for my own grandparents. And that's personal, and that means something to me. But I think that over recent years, it has moved for a lot of people from an act of remembrance to an act of politics. That it is symbolic for those people of a political stance instead of what it was originally for, was a symbol of remembering people who served or gave the ultimate sacrifice. And, the irony for me is that for my grandparents, I know that they felt very deeply about, in the Second World War, about the freedom of this country. And freedom means having different ideas to each other and expressing ourselves differently. And I think the poppy police are quite often running counter to what we were fighting for in that war. Quite literally, quite often, a lot of the same people who are engaged in this kind of culture war attempts are the same people who will jump up and down about virtue signaling, and the same people who jump up and down about the erosion of free speech. So often they're just telling on themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where the free speech warriors were to defend Charlene White for her right to not wear a poppy. And to be clear, Charlene and David Lammy are just examples of people who weren't wearing poppies, but probably would full-throatedly express their support for the armed services. You're allowed to not wear a poppy. The Royal British Legion themselves on their website say a lot of people choose not to wear a poppy. It's a personal decision. We appreciate the support. So I think you're right. It's the worst kind of right-wing virtue signaling. If we care about making people feel scared because they're not wearing a black and red flower and just harassing people in public life, fine. But if we actually care about people who've served in the armed services, there are a number of ways that people could lend their voice or their money to causes that would help people who have served. There's a huge problem with accommodation for people in the armed forces. Last year, a report came out, it was from the Commons Defence Committee, that said 2/3 of homes for service families need extensive refurbishment or rebuilding, i.e. are damp and mouldy. So we don't honour our current service people. There are huge issues around mental health, substance abuse, homelessness that impact veterans. Specifically, there was an inquest into Aaron Taylor's death this year, an Iraq war veteran, and the coroner said there appears to remain a lack of readily available, fully funded long-term rehabilitation and substance abuse recovery for veterans with PTSD. And the coroner says, in my opinion, there is a risk that future deaths could occur unless action is taken. And then one more not so fun fact. This time last year, the Trussell Trust released a report that found a quarter of adults who have served in the UK's armed forces have run out of food in the last 12 months, and they didn't have money to buy more. So that's twice the number of people in households where nobody has ever served. I mean, it's a scandal that 14% of households are running out of food, but there's something specific going on for people who've served in the armed forces. It feels like if you really cared about veterans and people who served in the armed forces, maybe you'd focus on that rather than what jacket, whether David Lammy left his poppy on the other jacket, which let's be real, that's what happened. He left his poppy on the wrong jacket. Politicians have read the script. So yeah, I just think there really are some issues facing people who served in the armed forces. Charlene White kind of tragically lost her father to suicide. And, she posted on Instagram being I'm really not working right now, but here's a picture of my dad who served in the army who I'm grieving. So yeah, I think it's it's irritating, petty. It's as you say, proof of right-wing people being insecure snowflakes, obsessed with virtue signaling. And also it's just a bit there are actually problems facing people who served in the armed services, but just put your energy into that. So it is Remembrance Sunday this weekend. So however you're choosing to commemorate it, with a poppy, without a poppy, not at all, we respect your right to do that. And thank you for joining us, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.